Hello, thank you for joining us today. I would like to welcome you to today's edition of the weekly webinar series. Today's topic provides an in-depth review of basics of data encryption for our Privacy and Security series webinar. I'm Ria Shaffi and I'll be your host today. Before I introduce our guest speaker, I'd like to point out a few ground rules. First, recording this session, and I will make it available on the HITRIC Learning Center next week. Because we are recording the session, all participants' lines are muted. There will be a structured Q&A session at the end for us to address any questions you may have during the webinar. We ask you to hold all questions until the QA session and refer all questions in order to our speakers in the order in which they are received. If you have a question, simply type it in the chat window. Please direct all questions to everyone so that we can maintain a transcript. For those we do not get to, we will post a transcript of Q&A on the weekly webinar site on the HITRIC portal for everyone's benefit. Now, to welcome our presenters and producer. Leading the discussion today will be Ray Young, New York City's Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, and he also has over 4 years of experience in IT. Stephanie Risk is our producer, so if you have any technical questions, please use the chat box to direct them to her for immediate support. Now, without further ado, let me turn it over to Ray.
Everyone, and welcome, and thank you for joining me. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about, we're going to talk a lot about encryption. We're going to talk about what is it exactly, talk about the pros and cons of using encryption, why you should encrypt information, how does it work, what are keys, because you hear that term used a lot, and what do you encrypt when it comes to protected health information, what methodologies are there around, and how to back up encrypted data. And okay. When we complete this, you're going to learn about what encryption was all about. You should have a good knowledge of what it's all about. You're going to learn about different methodologies that are out there with regards to encryption, because there's a lot of them out there. You'll learn what types of data you need to encrypt and the new regulation going into effect about encrypting your data. Okay? So, what is encryption? Well, encryption basically is a method that effectively scrambles information that's not easily interpreted. Decrypting or deciphering is the reverse method. So you have encryption, decryption, and ciphering and deciphering. So encryption and decryption methods rely on something called a key. It's the heart of any encryption process. Ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs would not be possible had it not been for a key. This was created actually in 196 BCE, which we call before Common Era. It's known as the Rosetta Stone, which I'm sure you've all heard about it. Hieroglyphs were language of the ancient Egyptians. The meaning of the symbols had lost over many centuries. During World War II, the Germans encrypted information by a device called the Enigma machine. Had it been for the capture of the Enigma machine or the discovery of the Rosetta Stone, deciphering both of these communications would have been a daunting task. It is the same concept today with today's encryption methods. The key, deciphering encrypted data would take a very long time. Information that has been encrypted today can be decrypted without a key. However, some methods of encryption can take actual centuries to decrypt, even using the fastest computers today. So if this key is so valuable, it is strongly advised that the key be kept secure and typically password protected. It has been suggested by Health and Human Services that the key be kept in a different location other than the one that contains data that's being encrypted. For example, if you're encrypting information on a hard disk, you would not want to put the key on the same hard disk where the encrypted information is. Okay? So what are some of the pros and cons with regards to encryption and decryption? Well, the pros are the data is extremely secure. It requires no extra disk space because the encrypted data actually resides in the same place that the normal data resides. It cannot be used without the key, even if the disk is physically removed and accessed by another system. It is also application transparent. Applications behave the way they always have. They have no idea that their data is encrypted or decrypted. So some of the cons, well, possible slowness due to the encrypt and decrypt method, but this is becoming more and more insignificant as time goes on. Some EHR vendors will cite this as a reason why they don't encrypt. Well, it should not really be an issue. If you're processing a couple of million records, yeah, you may notice, a 10 or 15-second difference in time. So it's not really that different. If the key is lost, so is the data. And like I said before, it's almost impossible to decrypt the data without the key. So the key is extremely important. And if you lose the key, you've effectively lost all your data. Okay? So these are some of the pros and cons that are out there. Okay? So why encrypt? Well, it's HIPAA regulation that an entity must, in accordance with 164.306, implement a mechanism to encrypt and decrypt electronic protected health information. And is also currently one of the 22 addressable controls. So it simply states that we must implement a mechanism to encrypt and decrypt electronic protected health information. In stage 2, EHR vendors must encrypt their information. So right now, some of the EHR vendors are not encrypting the information. This concerns me greatly. Okay. So, why do we encrypt? Well, according to HHS, and I did some analysis on this, approximately 57%, that's not 0.57%, it's 57% of all breaches are due to stolen computers and media. If encrypted on these devices or the media, these would not be considered breaches at all, as the data is safe. Okay? Most providers also think that all the PHI is stored in the EHR. That's not really true. You have to think about where PHR is stored on your computers. It could be simple things like word processing documents, reports downloaded, things like that. You have to think about what other devices that may have ePHIs, such as ECG machines, photocopy machines, and other equipment. These all may have PHI on them. Okay? So it's much safer to adopt encryption on all workstation and talk to vendors of other equipment how to protect this PHI. In reference, in August of 2009, HHS issues guidance on what render your PHI to be secure. One of them is destruction, which means of all your documents, switching your hard disks and things like that. And the one is actual encryption of the data. Here we see that there is guidance available, and it's going to be a law. So people ask, how does it actually work? I mean, what's the nuts and bolts of this? Well, on these slides here, before you encrypt something, your application would behave normally. The application would make a request to the operating system. It would talk to a driver for the disk drive or communication device or tape drive or whatever, and the data would be returned back to the application. Now when you encrypt something, the application behaves normally. It still makes a request to the operating system, and the system passes that request off to an encrypt and decrypt process. In conjunction with the key, it communicates that to the driver of the disk or tape, and then turns that data back unencrypted. Okay, so it's a process that gets involved in the actual low-level type of operations that the operating system does. Okay, so talk a little bit about what are keys. A key can be a file, a password, or other data stream that's required to unlock encrypted data. It may be on a USB stick, it may be embedded in a network appliance, it may be on a CD or a dongle, something you plug in a little USB thing, or a simple password. Some people have the keys located someplace else that use a password to get them. So, again, I want to confirm that HHS has recommended that the key should not be located on the same equipment you're trying to protect. Also, when we talk about passwords, it's human nature to leave a key in the device or place a password on a post-it note on the side of the display. Obviously, these are not safe places. It's also to have a backup of the key kept in a safe, secure location in the event of a disaster. As I told you before, if you lose the key, chances are you've lost the data. So you want to have this key backed up and stored in a secure area, in a safe, preferably off-site somewhere. It's not you're going to want to use it often, but in the event of a disaster, if you lose the key, you can always get it back. Okay, so what do I encrypt? I mean, we hear the term now, we know how to do it, but what do we encrypt? Well, we have to encrypt data that's at rest or data that's in flight, all right? So flight data is PHI that is transmitted from one computer to another, okay? Such as it's going to or from an electronic health record to another provider, things like that. At rest is data that is stored in any media, such as disk, USB stick, tape, etc., whether it's online or not. So if you're doing backups and that PHI on it, it has to be encrypted and the tape stored somewhere, either at your facility or off-site. But it is not online. It's not readily available for use, but it must be encrypted. Okay? So what do we mean by data in flight? Data is a transmission of data via electronic means, such as in email. We can send data back and forth. Application, that's not to say you should send PHI through an email, but some email systems which do allow it and do allow encrypted information. Application from one computer to an application on another computer. This includes medical devices such as EKG machines, things like that, blood pressure monitors that may transmit the information via Bluetooth or by Wi-Fi to your EHR. That data should be encrypted. File sharing protocols, one computer to another using networking protocols like VPN, VNC, remote desktop protocols. Internet chat, which is information that goes back and forth on a chat kind of a thing. Social networking, because it's stored up there. I mean, it's transmitted back and forth up there. Wireless networking. All right, so those are examples of like data in flight. Data at rest is the storage of any data on any media, such as disks, whether they be internal or external, USB sticks, CDs, DVDs, tapes, floppy disks. I don't know if anyone uses these anymore, but flash memory, handheld devices, and even cloud-based storage. This is a big thing that people are using. It's just a big marketing term for putting your data on someone else's server. So if you're doing cloud-based storage, it all has to be encrypted sitting up there. Okay, so what do you encrypt? Okay, files that need to be secure, you can just encrypt those files. Full disk encryption may interfere with operating system updates and other applications installs. So best practice would be to encrypt a partition to store the user files on the encrypted partition. A partition can be a portion of the total disk, or a partition can be the entire disk. Normally, a disk is partitioned into a section that contains the operating system and its components, and another partition contains data only. This way, if you need to upgrade the operating system, your data would not be affected. You might use partitions as separate drive letters in Windows or other similar operating system. So it's considered best practice to keep data separate from the operating system. In the event the operating system crashes or runs out of room where you have to reinstall something, your data is still protected. Here's an example of one system to a multiple disk systems at the bottom. So here we say, rather than try and figure out what you're going to encrypt, such as individual files or databases, just say, listen, I'm going to encrypt this entire partition, and whatever goes in it, it's going to be protected. So you partition the disk, as we have here in the one disk system, so that disk is broken up into two sections, or multiple disks in your system. You can say one of the disks is totally encrypted, and the disk is not, which would have the operating system. Okay? So various methodologies exist for the items you want to encrypt, such as portable media, such as laptops, tablets, handheld devices, USB sticks, tapes, things like that, and non-portable media, such as desktops with internal hard disks or servers. These are things that are usually bolted down or doesn't really move around so much. So portable media methods be a USB key. They can just be password protected. As we said before, it's not really the best way to do it, but if not having encrypted data, passwords are the second best option here of a password in the encryption key. So the data is still encrypted. It just needs a password to get into it. Non-portable media methods, you can still use a USB key. You can use passwords. Again, not a very secure method, but if it's the only thing you have, it would have to be. You can use dongles, which are hardware devices. They're not memory sticks and USB sticks. They're little dongles that have electronic stuff in them. A network appliance, which is excellent, and something that's hardware specific, like some computers actually have a card or a board or some kind of hardware assist method that does the encryption for you. Those are usually the fastest methods of encryption and decryption. But like I said, unless you're processing millions of records, you know, be using something like that. So again, as we talked about, human nature would indicate that external devices are inherently left in the device that they're trying to protect, such as a USB stick that has the key in it, or a CD where the key is. So users normally passwords for protected keys next to the computer protecting. In addition, manufacturers' encryption methods are well known, and they're extremely easy to hack. And most of the time, all you need is the administrative password. I, for example, was given an encrypted database that was done by a Microsoft SQL server. They was encrypted. Well, all I had to do was import it to my database that was unencrypted, and because I had the administrative password, the operating system let me decrypt the data and encrypt the data unencrypted. In effect, that data was not encrypted at all. And as you can see here, I did a little Google out of items out there that are actually available to you if you forget password into a system. So it's not that secure. Okay, so as I talked before, the different methods that are available, there's a company out there called Jetico, and the reason why I picked them is that they make solutions for the military. They do encryption and decryption for the military. All drone planes are encrypted with your system. And they have an encryption solution that takes a very unique approach. They have a tiny network adapter that can be placed anywhere on the network, even tucked away in the ceiling, behind the wall, in a cabinet. Nobody knows where this device is. At each PC, as it comes up, it looks at that device on the network somewhere. So if your PC gets stolen, or even your server gets stolen, which according to HHS, 57% of all breaches are due to stolen equipment, if equipment gets stolen, it's absolutely useless because they don't know where the key was stored in the building. So that could be any place on your network. So a criminal will have to find out, locate the key, steal that, reconstruct the network in order to access the information on the computers that they stole. So it's a very, very secure method of doing it. And that's the only thing that Jetico does is making encryption and decryption methods. They don't write software for operating systems or database or anything else. So, you know, you want to look at that as one method here. Okay. So how do I encrypt it? People ask me, well, what's the process? What do I have to do? How long does this take? And well, what you have to do is back up your data. I cannot express this enough. If you do not back up your data and you install the encryption thing and something goes wrong, you have lost all of your data. So it's imperative that you back up your data. It also might be a good idea to test that you can restore it, so that what you backed up you can restore. Okay. Next, do is you want to install your encryption software, which a typical application install. You may want to put something on a server or put something on your client stuff. It may ask you for a key to use. Something that is automatically generated, which may be voluminous, may be absolutely huge, the length of the key, or be something that you enter as a password. As we said before, passwords are not very secure. So, you know, you want to look at something where the key may be generated for you automatically. To you, it doesn't really matter what the key is as long as you can get the data. So the longer or bigger the key is, the more secure the algorithm would be to encrypt the data. So encryption data will then go through and reading all your data on the disk where you told it to encrypt. It will read that data, encrypt it, apply the key, and then write it back to its original location. So it's also a good idea to create 2 copies of the key and store it away in a very secure location. So after this process is done, you will have an encrypted partition or an encrypted data space. At that point, the only way to get to that data is to apply the key to it, and a method that will be able to read the key and decrypt it. How do I back up my encrypted data? Well, as we said before, data that's stored on tapes that are backing up must also be encrypted. However, certain methods for your favorite backup software will get the data presented to it as unencrypted data because the key has already been applied to it and it's been decrypted and presented to your application software. The data will remain the same coming to your backup software. It appears as though the data is not encrypted. So therefore, you need to use the encryption mechanism that's built into your tape backup. Okay, that's what you're using. Some actually clone the partition. They actually back up the whole partition in its entirety. And if that's the type of software you use, then the data is already encrypted because it's not paying attention to file names, file structures, or any of that stuff. It's backing up the data in its raw form. So since that data is already been encrypted, nothing else needs to be done. You'll be protected that way. So, as encryption is really not hard to do, nor is it expensive to do. Most people think that encryption stuff is extremely expensive. There are free software out there that you can get to encrypt your data. But I choose to pick software that is very reliable and very secure and has some kind of support behind it. But it's the safest method for protecting your electronic protected health information. So you should try to use an encryption method that's not tied to any particular operating system. What I mean by that is if you're using a monolithic approach, such as using one vendor's operating system and database and all that kind of stuff, it's kind of integrated to each other. But once you do that, how you encrypt data, how that stuff works, is all tied together, and it's very easily hacked, if you will, because it is well known. So try not to use a method that's tied to a particular operating system. In addition, if you have backups that's stored from an older operating system, you try to restore them, the operating system won't understand how to decrypt that data, so that data may be useless if you try and bring it back. And again, remember, according to HHS, only destruction and encryption of data will be your PHI secure. Performing encryption is far better than reporting breaches. There are things out there that are easy to do. There are things that are difficult to do. Some that are not very time-consuming to encrypt. So it's well worth it to do the encryption. As the expense related to it, pieces of software free. Some charge you for a workstation license, if you will. So each workstation that needs to have this software implemented, they'll charge you a license fee for each workstation. Some have a group license. So you might just want to poke around and find out what options are available to you. I think I've come under time right now, so I'll entertain any questions that you people might have.
Thanks, Ray, for your information. We just got one question in for now, and it says, we keep saying backup data as 2 copies. How do we safeguard them? Also, can we overwrite on the previous data? What are the pros and cons of overwriting?
Well, back up the data. It will be in its unencrypted form, obviously. Because you're going to need that data to recover if the encryption actually fails. But back up that data and you encrypt it, you no longer need those backups that you just made because it's already in its encrypted form. The encryption won't. So now what you would want to do is back the encrypted data that you have. So then you would use your backup utility and you would in its encrypted form. As far as use of tapes and things like that, I've found the only secure way of not getting data off tapes is to what they call degauss the tapes. It's basically take the tape and run through a strong magnetic field. This way data cannot be gotten off by any means. There are tools in the FBI uses that actually they develop the tape. They put it through magnetic flux material, which is basically like alcohol and iron filings, and they can actually see the data on the tape. However, when you degauss the tape using a degaussing tool, data cannot be read by any means. So if you're decommissioning tapes, you're getting the tapes, you're not going to use them anymore. The safest thing that I would suggest is to degauss them. Degaussing units sell for like $20 in Radio Shack and places like that. So if you don't need the tapes anymore, you can degauss them. You can't do the same with hard disks, though, unfortunately.
Thanks, Ray. The next question is, what encryption software do you recommend?
Well, I'm kind of have to be impartial to what software that I do recommend. Like I said, I stay away from all monolithic companies, such as Microsoft and companies like that. I choose to stay with companies that the only thing that they do is encryption. And in doing some of my research, I was extremely impressed by the company called Jetico, their approach to data encryption. And because they do it for the military, obviously the military has faith in them to encrypt. So you might go to their website, you can send them an email, ask them to describe how they do it or what methods they use and what they charge. I find it to be a very reliable company since that's all they do.
Okay, thank you. And the next question I can take on it, it's asking if this presentation will be available at healthit.gov for listening in the future. Yes, and I pasted a link earlier, and I'll be happy to do that. The slides are currently available, and the presentation will be available next week through the HITRIC Learning Portal. So the answer is yes to that. And then for Ray, the next question is, with everything being web-based now, there's less media to lose. So how do we protect against people logging in through the web-based EHR using stolen identification, such as usernames and passwords?
Well, using the security risk assessment tool, you should be able to identify how people can get to your information. Typically, people, when they want to steal your passwords, they can alter what they call domain name server's address, point to their server, and it looks like that you're entering your password and everything else to your particular EHR vendor, when in fact you're not. So you should always look for, if you're using the HTTPS at the top, you should on your web browser to make sure that there's a little symbol of a lock, some other kind of sign that says that your transmission of data is secure. The other thing is when you look at your firewall, you make sure that your firewall is intact. And a firewall is able to redirect traffic if it could. So this is something as part of your security risk assessment you should be looking at and looking at it monthly to determine whether someone is in there trying to play with your firewall and redirecting you to other places. As far as your EHR vendor goes, they're the ones that are responsible for securing and encrypting their databases. So it might be a good idea to talk to them and find how they are doing it, how they're doing their encryption, how they're securing their information. They should give you that in the form of a document that you can keep on hand in case, when you get audited, that you can find how is your PHI protected. You can say, well, here, my EHR vendor is encrypting it this way. So that'll be my two recommendations as far as protect identification, going over some kind of transmitted means. Checking your firewall, making sure your HTTPS is in place, things like that. That's what I would recommend you doing.
And the next question is asking, do you have any real-world experience with any practice using encryption and their experience as a result?
I have some practices now that are using some form of encryption. They used to. They changed it now to the patient portal, but we're sending patient information to the patient using encryption methods. I kind of steered them away from that because these methods that are out there are pretty well known. They were using things like zip, WinZip, and encrypting it. Those mechanisms are so known that that's really not acceptable. So your best method is to use the patient portal if you're sending any information like that. I would suggest that if you, like I said, email, no patient information be sent through email. That's my general rule of thumb. I don't care if it's encrypted or not. Email systems have what they call store and forward mechanisms all along the chain to its destination. So data is stored in many, many locations, and anybody could pick that up and decipher the information. You use wire sniffers. Anybody at your facility can use what's called a wire sniffer to check the data as it's going. As far as servers and things like that, no, and people are relying on the EHR vendor to be encrypting information, and most of the vendors are not encrypting their information. So it's frightening that they have servers in their facility and rely purely on physical access, such as alarms and locks on the doors and things like that. But we all know burglars are not too fond of alarms, and they'll break down 1, 2, 3, and they're in your building, and they're out in 2 minutes with your server under their arm. So people are really not encrypting the data because they hear stories from the EHR vendor. That's complicated, it's slowed down. That's not really true.
Okay. And the next question is, does data on servers, iSeries, or Windows in a data center with two-factor authentication to have the ePHI data encrypted?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because what happens is you can take the disks out of the machines physically themselves and put them on a Linux-based machine. I can be reading the data, no problem. I can go sector by sector and reading data without any form of hardware at all. I can get data. This is how BI and other organizations look at data that's on systems. Even data that's just been, you deleted the data. It's not deleted. It's sitting there on the disk. What happens is when you delete data, it loses the link between the name of the file and the file itself. And it updates certain tables and saying this area is available for use. It does not delete the data. So the data is still sitting there on the disk. And there are hundreds, if not thousands, of data recovery tools out there. And even though a disk may be damaged and physically not working, never ever throw it out. Just Google how many companies out there can recover data from a damaged disk. There's thousands of them. So you physically must destroy the data. So yeah, using companies like in service, as was mentioned, with iSeries or Windows, unless the controller of the disk, hardware, piece of hardware that sits in the computer, unless that is encrypting the data, then it is not secure. It is still sitting on the disk, unencrypted, and in very easily readable form. No kind of access mechanisms, whether it be Active Directory, domain controllers, LDAP, none of that stuff can ever protect that information. Because take the hard disk out, install it in another computer, and I'm reading all the data you can have. So those are not good protected. They have to be encrypted.
Okay. Next question is, what risk assessment tool do you recommend?
Oh, everyone uses their own tools. I mean, you can use your own tool. Let's put it that way. But ONC publishes the tool they have for performing the risk assessment. Auditors are used to seeing that tool because it's so widely used right now. So I would strongly suggest using the ONC risk assessment tool. Here in New York, webinars and actually how to use the tool. I actually go through every single question and explain to the providers what the question means, how to do things, what I mean by security, what do I mean by firewalls and things like that. I go into it in detail because most of the practices out there, most surprised, they're clinicians. They're not IT people. But I don't want to turn them into IT people. What I really want to do is they really have to have a basis for understanding as to what's going on. So even the IT vendors will talk to them in plain English. They understand what's going on. They don't have to actually do the work or get involved in the nitty-gritty of it, but understand. So it's very important that by using the security risk tool that the ONC provides, they do a pretty good job of going up as to what systems you should be looking at. And really, most feedback that I've gotten from practices, they say that risk assessment tool opens eyes to all sorts of risks that they have. They imagined they would have some of the risks that the tool showed them. So again, I would prefer to use the ONC tool because it's everybody knows about it. The people in the extension centers can help you with the tool. If you're going out using your own tool, you're basically on your own. I risk assessments back from people that wrote a one-page Word document. Clearly, that was not enough. It would fail an audit. I've been through many, many audits in my life. And one of the things you don't want to do is get the auditors angry at you. Something like that would definitely get an auditor angry at you. So you don't want to fail an audit. It's okay if you have audit exceptions, which means there are certain risks that you're taking care of. The auditor sees them as an exception and fine. But you did your security risk assessment. So I would use the ONC tool and see any help that you can get to help you fill out that tool.
Thank you. Next question is asking, can you repeat the difference between the encryption requirements in meaningful use stage 1 versus stage 2?
Certainly. Well, in stage 1, the meaningful use requirement means the vendors don't have, the EHR vendor does not have to encrypt the data, which is kind of bizarre. But stage 2, the vendors will have to encrypt their data. So it's kind of interesting to note that HIPAA, covered entity, must, with 164.306, a mechanism to encrypt and decrypt electronic protected health information. So it almost seems to me, I know Laura's on the call. Laura might be able to address this. It seems that they put the onus on the covered entity to encrypt your data, but they're not saying anything about an EHR vendor. But now in stage 2, they're requiring the EHR vendor to encrypt, because most, covered entities don't understand what is required to do that, and they think it's a big deal. I know you want to comment on that. You feel free to do that. Okay, guess you couldn't talk. Still on?
I don't see any other questions at this point.
Okay.
So why don't we give the audience a few more minutes if they have. Oh, I'm sorry, there's one that just came in. Will stage 2 then lower the overall risk or assessment or requirements for risk assessment? I'm sorry.
I believe it will. I believe it will be putting pressure on the EHR vendors now to do the right thing. However, I said before, I think the EHR vendors are going to take an easy out. I use something like a Microsoft encryption, which in my case is not really encryption at all. They'll just activate it and say, we're encrypted, just to follow the law. I kind of look at the spirit of what they're trying to say. And what we're trying to do is protect patients' health information. That's basically what we're trying to do. So why would you do the right thing as opposed to doing things to the letter of the law, saying, yeah, we're encrypting? But what is that encryption? And a company like, use an outside company to do your encryption that just specializes in encryption, they're going to do a great job at encrypting. So look at the cost and the price difference. If I use a company that just specializes in encryption, what does it cost versus them just flipping on a switch that says, okay, Microsoft SQL Server, encrypt my data for me. You look at the best thing for your patients. You want to look at the best thing. And I would like to go look at other companies besides these monolithic companies, because their mechanisms are well known. So they're well known, they can be hacked very easily. So these are things that I would say is that yes, it will the risk overall. Okay, legally they're complying with the law, but how well is that encryption? I don't know. I try to look for the best bang for my buck at this point, because the patients are relying on you to protect their information. So if you can do it's good enough, or yeah, it's really good, and the price difference is not that much, then why aren't you doing the real encryption? You see, this is what I would suggest to the practices out there. Do the best you can, just you can afford, and make sure you're doing it in compliance with the law. That's all. But again, in stage 2 and say this is for EHR only. Let's look at all the other data that you have sitting on your disks. I would encourage all the providers to go look and see what information's on your hard drive. Is there anything on there, such as a fax that you received, a report somewhere, an Excel or a Word document that's sitting there, that's patient information on it. That all should be protected. That's outside the scope of the EHR. So the best thing to me is like just encrypt the disk, and you'd be done with it. You can redirect your My Documents folder, if you will, to an encrypted disk. So, and that's stored in the My Documents folder, is encrypted by default. So you don't have to do anything. It's totally transparent to you. Okay, so that's my yes. It would reduce the stage 2 would reduce the risk.
Okay. The next question is, will a security risk assessment be required for each year of participation in the incentive program?
Absolutely. That is, you must conduct a review, a security risk assessment. So that's the law. So yeah, you have to do it each year. But the thing here, You don't have to, you have to view it. It's the first time you're doing it, you have to conduct one. You have to do it. You have to physically go, look at your equipment, look at the locks on the doors, look at this, look at that, look at all the equipment that may store PHI, look at manual processes that you have that may have PHI laying around, patient files, things like that. It covers all the protected health information. So yes, you have to do it every year. And I think right now it's just a self-attestation where you just click a box and say, yeah, I've done it. But they've already begun audits. So they're going to be looking to see your security risk assessment. I don't know what it's going to be in a few years. You may have to be submitting your security risk assessment. The auditors will use that and say, well, you're not doing this. You say you're doing it, but you're not doing it. It's, I'm fearful of auditors. They'd help you. They'd make sure you're doing the right thing. And doing security risk assessment is the right thing to do. So you have to do it by law. You have to do it every year in order for you to get your incentive payments.
Next question is, given that I have a key for the encrypted data on my disk, when I send an encrypted file out, how do I send the key to the recipient so they can read my file?
Okay. It's kind of so when you have encrypted data on your disk, that's different than having a file that you're transmitting. Two different things. You can still send a file that's, quote, sit disk unencrypted, and you set file as encrypted. There's kinds of methods out there. There's secure file transfer protocols. Those are FTP kind of things with an S in front of it for secure. And that handshake's exchanging keys back and forth. If sending a data, let's say you have a CD or a disk that you're mailing to someone, and that's encrypted. Obviously, you're going to send the key on a different mail, or vice versa. You could send the key by a different method than you're sending the CD. You don't put them in the same envelope. You can call, if it's a password-protected key, probably it will be. You call the person on the other end and say, here's the password. I'll get the CD in the mail. Here's the password you use. That's totally fine. So you're doing it in two different methods. You're not giving the key with the thing.
Okay.
Did that, Greg?
Okay, and the next question is, do you consider analog fax secure?
Absolutely. Analog fax is secure for the express purpose that it's a point-to-point. It can point to another. And the methods that they use for sending faxes, somebody would have to, it's kind of I can get very technical and express to you why it is, that they send either frequency shift keying and things like that, and you have to be in sync with the sending fax unit. They send handshaking protocols back and forth as the fax is going, and error correction going back. So it's not an easy thing just to tap into a line and listen. You have to understand what's being sent back and forth and where you are within the fax transmission. So it's considered secure because the phone company does not store any information. It just passes it right on. It actually makes a direct connection between the source and the destination. Okay. What email or anything done by the internet, it's all passed through a server. It's always going through someone else's thing. And most emailers have a thing called a store and forward, which means, let's say you're an AOL customer and you're sending it to a Hotmail account. Well, the AOL software reads your email and ignores it. It says, I need to talk to Hotmail. Hotmail is not available, so I have to communicate with another email server that's in Maine somewhere. So you send the email along to them. So the email is now passed. Now it's on two different servers. Then second server says, oh, I can talk to Hotmail, and it's sent along to Hotmail. The data now sitting on three different servers. So it sits there for a period of time and automatically deleted. Now, we don't know their deletion methods. Do the actual purge it? So electronically shred it? What do you do with that? You have no control over that. So that way, email or anything sent over the internet is not considered secure because it goes through so many chains. And you can go so far. There are tools available if you open up a command line prompt and say, give me a trace route to Google. It will actually show you how many hops it takes to get Google. even though you see it as an instantaneous thing, you're going through many, many servers in order to get to your destination. That's the same that happens with your email. And any one of those servers at any point in time can grade and hold on to it. Especially email, because that's what they do. That's the inherent nature of an email server. It stores and forwards. It stores and forwards. That's what it does, because there's no guarantee that it got to its destination. So it has to get the email total and then forward it along. So in any question, a long way around, yes, an analog fax line is definitely more secure than anything on the internet. Ed?
Okay. Facilities have WAN links between where EHR data resides and the clients at the facility. Do telco-provided private WAN links need to be encrypted?
There's a lot of different acronyms in there. First one is just for wide area network, and you're just talking about the EHR, the data being sent over a public communications method. Your communication provider does provide direct links, if you want to, between one source and a destination. They do provide that. They're very expensive, but yes, you can do that. But you got to remember, because information is going over public type networks, there are many intermediaries in between, not you and your telecom provider. It could go between one telecom provider and another provider to get to its destination. So it's not just one telecom provider you're dealing with. So, but if you want, let's say Verizon, let's pick them. You want to provide a link, a secure link from one point to another, they can provide that to you, absolutely. So it's a one provider link. They don't do any third parties. They provide it over their own microwave channels, their own satellite communications, but it's all owned by Verizon. They used to do that for years. When you get private links between banks to do it, for example, they had to get private links all the time. But with the secure communications, they found it much cheaper to use public networks, but the data that's actually traveling on the public networks is very secure. So that's why they adopt that method. It's cheaper to use a public infrastructure than it is to use a single vendor type of solution. Okay? Because if that link goes down, that private link goes down, you're in trouble to figure out when it's going to come back up and so on and so forth. And it could take a long time for it to come up. So then what do? Go get another one? Have an alternate? It's much easier to get an alternate internet service provider line, which could come from Google, Verizon, Cablevision, could come from anybody, to get your data transferred. But data that's on the wire should always be encrypted, because sniff it. I mean, I can, even in my building here, I can put, and we have a very large IT facility here, I can put a sniffer on the wire, just watch everything that's going by. That we do send is very, very secure. So the data is meaningless to me if I see it.
Next question is, are the email on those servers backed up, as in normal daily computer operations require backup?
Absolutely. It's called, they have to do it by law. It's called discovery. All emails have to be discoverable. So if you're sending an email from one person to another, even text messages, believe it or not, they're stored on servers, so they can be discovered for legal purposes. So yeah, any email that they usually have is usually backed up.
Okay. And I think the next one is a follow-up to what your answer was for a previous question, and it's asking, you can sniff layer 2 packets on telco links?
I'm very technical and probably beyond the scope of this. You can sniff, there's all kinds of devices out there to sniff all kinds of data. The problem really resides is, does it make any sense to you? And that's the purpose of encryption. Does the data make any sense to you? If it makes sense, then it's considered secure. All right? Yeah, you can sniff all kinds of data. Wireless data, hard data, Ethernet data, all kinds of data you can sniff. But that makes sense to you, and that's the whole purpose of encryption. I answered that question. Sorry, Ray.
Okay. So there don't have any other questions coming in, but if the audience, I can give you a minute or two, and we still have a little bit of time to answer, so we can be on the line for a moment if anything else comes in. And thanks for all of your answers. Much appreciated.
Like I said, my background is quite great. I've been in the banking industry for many years. I was involved with Citibank's proprietary ATM network for a number of years, so very familiar with how they secure their data. As IBM came in, wanted to know how we did it, and they threw them out of the shop. We didn't want to get public knowledge. With Citibank's credit card processing system too before they moved out of the state, so that's also very secure information. So encryption and secure information transfer has been around for decades. It's nothing new, and people that like institutions have been superb at doing that. The military's been great at doing that. Hacks that you see is they don't get confidential information, so they've been a pretty good job at it.
Okay. There's another question that's asking, what about secure, in quotes, emails like Postini?
There are many different email providers and types of mechanisms out there, and my advice is that if encrypted, then it would be considered to be secure. Then you have to look at the encryption that they use. Is it very hackable? And you could do all kinds of research on that to find out if it is. Something like WinZip, very secure. That can be hacked. I mean, just Google it and you'll find out. So if you're using, like I said before, if you're using secure email servers, they encrypt the data and they will send it out. But encryption and decryption has to work in two ways. So the recipient must also have to know how to decrypt it. So that are they using a special client? An email client. People talk about Microsoft Outlook. It's the most hacked piece of software in the business. It's the number one hacked piece of software. So, if you're looking at Outlook to do any kind of email, you're like, well, no, I don't think so. So other email clients out there who actually receive your emails from other providers, from Google, from Hotmail, from AIM, from all these kind of things, all these accounts can come into that client. So if that client understands how to decrypt information, that's considered secure too. As long as the information is originated as being encrypted, it will be encrypted all the way through the chain. Okay? So, yeah, if you're using an email server like that, yes, then it will be considered secure.
Okay, and we have two questions, so hopefully we have time to answer these two, and then we'll wrap up. And for the audience, if you have any other questions, feel free to type them in the window, and we will post them on the site. And I believe you can also reach out to Ray or Hittrick for further elaboration on your questions. So Ray, the next question is, how does the network encryption device you recommended handle mobile devices like a laptop when you take the device home to work?
Good question. I was asked that today, as a matter of fact. When you're accessing information that's at your facility, is that your device will get a secure VPN connection to network at home, your network in the office, rather. I'm sorry. You'll get a secure VPN connection. The software at the other one will recognize that this is a secure VPN connection. The handshake will still go back and forth to say, I need to unlock this data and I need to present it. However, the data itself, I mean, it depends upon how the data is being used. If you're something like an Excel file or something like that, the data will be presented back to you as an encrypted file. So that it's encrypted in your PC or handheld devices. That's where the encryption takes place. So the key is being delivered to you via electronic, but it authenticates who you are. So you're allowed to use this type of encryption mechanism or not. So, a secure VPN connection to your host, wherever that may be, a handshake is given, your PC or your device asks a request for the key. It's also very secure. The key is then sent to you, and the data that's being passed back and forth is secure, but the decryption takes place on your mobile device. So it's pretty secure.
Okay, thank you. And Ray, if you can quickly answer the last question. It says, following what you just said about discovery, in quotes, regarding emails and texts, how long are these kept and where?
I think for corporations, and Laura will be able to answer that one again. That's a legal question. I think that's about 7 years for discovery. So these companies have to keep these emails around for 7 years, I believe. I know in recent hospitals I've been in, we had all of our emails for 7 years. That was a requirement for us. So anything got sent back and forth, we kept. And it was a very simple thing we implemented on our email server. All we did was send blind carbon copies to the archive email server. And what that did is just kept archive copies of every email that was sent or received in our email system. So we could easily produce them for legal purposes if possible. And that information was stored on an encrypted disk.
All right. Well, that wraps up our Q&A session. And Ray, thanks so much for your time today. And thank you
My pleasure.
And thank you all for participating as well. And we hope you enjoyed the session. We appreciate your feedback on today's session. So please fill out the brief survey that has just popped up in the poll window. Your feedback is confidential, and it will take only a couple of minutes to fill out. And just note that we do take your suggestions seriously, and we will use the information to improve future webinars. Also, we'll continue to cover adoption and implementation topics on the first Fridays of the month, meaningful use on the second and fourth Fridays of the month, and privacy and security on the third Friday of the month. Also, please feel free to email the HITRIC training team if you have any questions. Thanks again for joining, and thank you, Ray, and we look forward to seeing you on future webinars.
Thanks.
Yep, thanks.
Everyone.